tonight is not a debate about specific issues, the merits of issues, or partisan position on issues. Having said that, some of the examples that may be used or discussed are or have undeniably been divided across and within political parties. It always bears repeating, and I want to emphasize that JCRC is a non-partisan agency that works to preserve our democracy and values all faiths, races, nationalities, and ethnicities, and all political affiliations. Now, some of the players on tonight's program have changed because you know, the Unicam's in session and stuff happens. I would have said a different word, but I didn't. But I'd like to introduce our panelists. We are thrilled and honored to welcome former State Senator Adam Moorfeld. Adam specializes in nonprofit administration and development, governmental affairs, voting rights laws and policy, ballot initiatives, and grassroots, local, and statewide policy advocacy. Whoa.
Must have taken my LinkedIn.
I'll tell you. He served as a state senator in the Nebraska legislature from 2014 to 2022, and during which time he founded and currently serves as the executive director of the civic engagement, civic health, and voting rights nonprofit Civic Nebraska that employs over 100 full and part-time staff. He is also the founder and managing partner of Civic Strategies, LLC, a full-service policy, advocacy, and campaign consulting firm that has led and won local races and statewide ballot initiatives. His private law practice focuses on election law, civil rights, online harassment, and defamation claims. In a volunteer capacity, he serves as the chairman and founder of Nebraska Legal Action Fund to combat extremism and disinformation. Thank you for all you do. Also joining us tonight from Nebraska Appleseed is Omaid Zubit. I told you I'd screw it up. Zubit, right? Zubi. I asked him twice.
She did.
I did. Omaid is originally from Brandon, South Dakota, and came to Nebraska to attend the University of Nebraska-Lincoln for his undergraduate degree and his JD from the College of Law in 2011. After graduating from law school, Omaid joined Appleseed as a staff attorney for the Immigrants and Communities Program. He later moved to becoming Appleseed's federal policy director and is now the Strategy's Senior Director. Some of his duties include working with strategy directors to assess needs and opportunities for Appleseed's policy, organizing, legal, and communications work. Omaid currently serves on the board of directors for Civic Nebraska. I'm telling you, these bios are something else. We are also joined by our dear friend, as Arthur the Balloon goes, a round of applause. We are also joined by our dear friend Joe Giles, and Executive Director of the Women's Fund of Omaha. Before joining the Women's Fund, Joe was the Policy and Training Director for the Coalition for a Strong Nebraska, CSM, where she created training sessions for members and others in nonprofit sector to be able to participate more fully in the public policy process. She is also an award-winning media relations professional and journalist, and was a television reporter anchor for Omaha's KPTM Fox 42 News. Joe has a master's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri-Columbia, a bachelor's degree in psychology, and African American studies from Washington University in St. Louis, and a certificate in public health from the University of Nebraska Medical Center. In her spare time, Jo serves on the boards of several organizations, including Children's Physicians, Omaha Community Foundation, and Omaha Public Library Foundation. She was a member of Leadership Omaha Class 37 and 2012 recipient of the Midlands Business Journal 40 Under 40 Award. And our moderator is, is our JCRC Executive Director Sharon Brodke. I tell you, this is quite a group. They really are. And as usual, there will be Q&A after the program. So let's get on with the show. Woo, let's go.
Thank you. Thanks. I want to start by welcoming volunteers from some of the petitions that are floating around, and we're going to talk about the volume of them because it seems to be rather high this year relative to other years. And this is sort of like a mini trade show. So afterwards, if you haven't already, you can go to the tables, you can look at the petitions that are in circulation and learn more about them. There are 8 in circulation currently. There was one group, it's a Nebraska Right to Life coalition, and they had a petition in circulation. The gentleman, Robert Smith, called me on Sunday and said that they are pulling that petition for now because they don't have the required number of signatures that they need. And I think they're gonna kind of hang back and wait and see what the rest of the ballot initiatives do before they regroup and figure out their next move. So we will be talking not about, as Zoe said, not about the merits or the policy positions or whatever of all of these issues. We want everybody to mingle with our petitioners. And also, I forgot, I'm so sorry, ladies, the League of Women Voters are here as well. Because I'm looking right at you. I doubt that there's anybody in this room who isn't already registered to vote. However, there's another tool in our democracy toolbox that we're going to talk about tonight in advance of the primaries. And but let's start with the petitions and the ballot initiatives. And what's the difference between a constitutional amendment petition and a statute change petition, and the numbers of signatures that are required, the numbers of counties that get to weigh in, how those are determined by any given petition sponsor. Jo, do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll share, as my son says, the Gavin language, and the lawyers can talk about the actual law language. So there are 2 options, as Sharon mentioned, that you can change the statute that is existing in our state through a ballot initiative process. I am a ballot sponsor for the paid sick leave for Nebraskans initiative, so we need to collect roughly 90,000 signatures of voters. And so there's a signature threshold, and then there's also a county threshold. So 38 out of our 93 counties, we also have to collect 5% of registered voters in each of those 38 out of the 93. So we kind of pick which ones that we are going to try to qualify. So for a constitutional amendment, that would change the constitution of our state. So there's a higher threshold in terms of the volume of signatures. So roughly 90,000 for a statute, and then 122,000 for a constitutional amendment. And you still have to get 5% of registered voters in 38 of 93 counties.
Adam, being a former senator, why would people choose this route instead of calling their senator up and saying, hey, I have a bill, I have an issue, and I'd like for you to hear it and maybe introduce this bill?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a good question. I think that there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, what I have seen generally for most of the ballot initiatives has been a common theme of inaction in the legislature on certain issues. And, you know, we have somebody here well, we have two people here, with paid family leave. It's because they have not been able to get that passed in the legislature for a variety of different reasons. We have some folks here with the EPIC option. I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's eliminating property taxes or reducing. And that's because there's a lot of folks in the legislature that haven't been able to reduce property taxes in a way that they think is sufficient, right? Same thing with medical marijuana. I'm the co-sponsor of the medical marijuana. We have not been able to get that passed in the legislature. Same thing with Medicaid expansion about 4 years ago now. We weren't able to get that passed in the legislature, so we went to the ballot and we passed it. And the list goes on. So I think the common theme that you see with all of the ballot initiatives that you see this year and then in prior years is there's been a failure to take action on these issues in the legislature. And oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes, the ballot initiatives that have gone on the ballot the last few years, most of them have been passed into law. And for better or for worse, I mean, there's some ballot initiatives. I'm very much a proponent of the ballot initiatives or use of it. I think it's a great way to get people engaged in their democracy. But I was personally opposed to the voter ID ballot initiative. And, that passed. And it passed overwhelmingly. And so here we are. And I think we'll talk about that in a bit. But it's really inaction on the part of the legislature on issues that are often fairly popular.
And particularly, again, we're not debating the merits of issues or taking any sides on this, but it seems like the medical marijuana thing has been through a few cycles without ever having hit the legislature. I mean, just in the petition realm. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I might need to talk to my therapist before I answer. But yeah, no, I've been a part of all 3 rounds. The first time we collected enough signatures, way more signatures than what we needed, and the Supreme Court found that it violated the single subject rule, even though when we crafted language, we crafted it based off of the previous president. They changed their president and said it violated it. So the second time, the language that we have now. We came back and we started collecting again, and 2 of our 3 major donors passed away, one by pancreatic cancer, the other in a plane accident. And so we lost our funding 3 months before when we're going to really be in earnest for paid funding. And we almost, I think we were just, don't quote me on this, I think we were only 4,000 or 5,000 signatures short, and that was from literally just collecting day and night with volunteers. So it's very tough to get on the ballot without a paid, and we can get into that later if you want. But now, we're in our 3rd iteration. We have really strong signature collection going on right now, volunteer and paid, and we're just waiting for donors to come in for the big final push for the paid. And so we're really hoping, we're optimistic this time. It's separated into 2 different initiatives. One that legalizes it, possession of paraphernalia to use it. And then the second one is a regulatory petition. So we have to get both on the ballot and we have to pass both. But it's been a journey.
Okay, thank you. Omai, you have a lot of experience in this as well, and Adam touched on this. It costs a little coin to put petition and ballot initiatives together. Can you talk about how much it costs, where the funding comes from, some of the behind the scenes work that we don't hear a lot about?
Yeah, and I think, part of that too is one reason why you want to try to have action go in the legislature, for a number of reasons. Part of that calculation is cost. And so I think you really want to try to exhaust all you can do in terms of strategic or strategy around the legislature before tackling an initiative, because it is a long process in which you need some time to prepare and then to follow through on it. In terms of initiatives broadly, obviously you want to try to cast a wide net in terms of funding, and you want to first start with having a stable foundation of supporters across the state, because it is going to be a statewide issue. And as ballot initiatives have grown in popularity across the country, there are funders who look to invest in states to pass certain policies that would positively affect the communities in that state too. And so I think in the initiatives that Appleseed's worked on, whether that's been minimum wage, Medicaid expansion, essentially banning payday lending, and now paid sick leave, I think we've been able to do both, which is to say, been able to get a wide range of supports from people across the state, either people who are able to contribute what they can or what's most meaningful to them, and to also have some larger support that way. I would say like the typical cost for an initiative can range from anywhere from and you can pull all these reports from the Accountability and Disclosure Commission. I think some campaigns at the end, probably in the very low range is going to be like in the low, like 1.2 million, 1.5 million. And then on the higher range, it can depend on what sort of opposition you face for your initiative. And a lot of the opposition won't come in until after you file your signatures with the Secretary of State's office, and there's usually a lawsuit, and that costs money. And then the time span from when signatures are due, which is in July before the November ballot. July to November, depending on your issue, can cost money because people are going to run ads and do things around talking to voters and trying to mobilize people for or against it. And so depending on that, as you know, during political ad season, that stuff costs more in terms of digital, TV ads and all that stuff too. So, but I would say, typical campaign can range from anywhere from $1 to $2 million on the low end, and then depending on what the issue is, it can cost a little more after that.
Democracy is expensive. A direct democracy is expensive. Are there any current legislative efforts to limit, change, or end the ballot initiative process in the state of Nebraska?
There is.
Yes,
You guys want me
there
to talk, or do you want to talk for Joe?
There are two. One, it actually has a hearing tomorrow, and it is a bill that would allow people to remove their signatures from a petition once they've signed it. So the current process is when you see a petition that's circulating, there is some bold language that the volunteer, so someone like myself, would read the language and say, do you understand? Do you have any questions? And then you sign. So it's your name, your date of birth, the address where you're registered to vote, and your signature. They should match your voter file. So if you, under no changes, you would need to file an affidavit and with the Secretary of State's office to remove your name from a petition. So it's a little bit of a cumbersome process, but the idea is that you hopefully know what you're signing initially. So this bill would allow someone to simply write a letter and sign it and send it to the Secretary of State's office to say, take my name off. The challenge with that is, as you're running a campaign and you're trying to get a certain number of signatures in each of the counties, if you have counties where you might have gotten, 200 signatures, let's say, and then 10 people take their name off, then suddenly you've not qualified a county and you have wrapped up your signature effort. So it's a little tricky for those of us that are counting signature by signature to get enough to get on the ballot.
And in some of these counties, there's 200 people, and then 5% of 200 people, literally a few people getting off could knock off a petition for the entire state. And so it makes it really hard to manage it. And then also, I personally have security concerns with that. My signature is very illegible, and somebody could send in a letter taking my name off very easily, and then there's no way to verify that or to track that back to that person or track it back to a notary that said, yes, that person was in front of me. So, yeah, I think that there's also security concerns. Do you want me to talk about the second bill?
Yeah.
The second bill is by Senator Ben Hansen. I can't remember the bill numbers yet. I haven't memorized them. Probably will by the end of the session. But basically what it would do is one of two things. One, it would make it so you cannot pay people per signature. Because right now, signature campaigns do it one of three ways. One, volunteers. We all have a lot of volunteer signatures. Two, you pay somebody by the hour. Some campaigns do that. And then three, the most efficient, effective way is to pay per signature. And signature collectors really like that too, right? And you get really high performance in that sense. And they're trying to make it so that you can't pay per signature, which I think has some constitutional issues, but nonetheless, it's to make it harder to collect signatures and qualify the initiative. The second thing would make it so that you could not have donors donate to a ballot initiative more than $20,000 for that initiative. Now, I don't have $20,000 to give to an initiative. Some of you may, some of you may not. But the bottom line is that we have unlimited campaign contributions in every aspect of our elections right now in the state of Nebraska. Why would we make it so that the people's way of getting something on the ballot would suddenly have limits? And again, as Omaid noted, these ballot initiatives it requires a decent amount of money to be able to get them on the ballot. So in any case, both bills are really meant to make it tougher for citizens to be able to get it on the ballot.
I will say we've been pretty lucky so far compared to other states on that topic too. States who have not liked what initiatives that passed have done things like raise the threshold to pass an initiative to 60% approval. So even if you get a clear majority, your initiative doesn't pass, or to make the signature requirements more onerous. And so, well, I think, these two bills are things to monitor. Other states have faced some, other challenging pieces of legislation to try to undermine direct democracy in their own states.
And it's challenging enough as it is to get that volume of signatures, plus the county requirement for qualification and just the geographic distance in our state. You really have to make an effort to get that widespread support.
Medical marijuana is case in point. 80% approval on multiple different polls among Nebraskans, and we're still working hard, our third try, so.
Okay. What does it take to become a petitioner as a volunteer citizen and as a paid professional, if I want to moonlight?
Well, really it's just reaching out to an initiative that you're interested in and asking if you can be trained on the petition, and then they will sign you up for volunteer hours, or if they have paid opportunities. I know, maybe you want to talk about some of your organizing?
Yeah, again, like Joe said, if you go to web pages who are up, you can always reach out to folks or reach out to organizations like Nebraska Appleseed or Women's Fund or Civic Nebraska to learn more. And so, usually, again, the trainings are pretty simple and short. Anybody here can collect signatures. It's just a matter of following some basic rules on how to collect and to do it on a volunteer basis. And then, with some campaigns that are operating, there are paid firms that come in who also advertise to employ people on a temporary basis during the campaign, who also can pay folks that way too. And so, but I will say again, being a volunteer is very easy, and it's also can be fun to do if you have a partner or some friends with you to go, or family members. It can be a little intimidating at first, just to go talk to strangers and talk to them about the issue. But usually there's we give you friendly big things so people know that you're coming with them. It's not trying to sell them anything. And depending on where you're at, people. I know I can speak for the paid sick leave campaign. We try to have you go where you're most comfortable, and if you're willing to travel, we can help you do that. But we want to make sure it's a good experience to have people engage with the process and kind of learn more through it about it that way.
Yeah, a lot of people, sometimes what volunteers will do is they'll just bring in the family events, work get-togethers, things like that. So it's super low stress. The big thing that you have to do is if you're a volunteer, you have to have one that says volunteer. If you're paid, you have to have one that says paid, and you always have to read the object statement. Always. Those are the key things, and make sure that you have a different page for each county, right? That people are signing up for. So, it's actually pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and it can be a fun kind of group activity. I remember I brought the Medicaid expansion one to my family 4th of July. I had one uncle that didn't sign it, it was fine. I gave it a 50-50 chance, but yeah, and it's a great way to get your family and friends involved and engaged. So
I always use Halloween as an option because there's lots of, my son is 13 now, but we have lots of neighborhood folks that are out trick-or-treating if the weather's nice-ish. And so I just kind of go door to door along with kiddos and talk about the ballot initiatives or pass out, flyers for right before election time.
Is that a trick or a treat? Is it a trick or a treat?
It's
It's a good question.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
have to give the candy back.
So I give the candy to the kids and the grown-ups get a pamphlet on what they should vote for in November.
That's great. Let's go back to, Adam, you touched on the voter ID ballot initiative that passed. What does that mean for us in this room? How does that change the way we vote or what we have to do to vote? There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think a lot of us probably don't have to do anything, but we don't understand.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So bottom line, voters passed a constitutional amendment in the Nebraska Constitution requiring identification of some sort in order to vote, okay? So the legislature then had to pass a law to implement that and enact that. So last year, the legislature did just that. They passed a law implementing the voter ID constitutional initiative. And the bottom line is that you have to bring if you go in person, you have to bring some type of state issued or federal issued identification. If you do that, even if it's expired, you will be able to vote. But it has to be state of Nebraska or a federal passport or military ID. Students can bring student ID as well, as long as it's issued by the school and it's official and all that. There are some folks that are sometimes in nursing homes or things like that. There are certain exceptions. So I would really encourage you, there's pamphlets on your table, Civic Nebraska pamphlets. Go to civicnebraska.org, click on voting rights, and there's a whole election 2024 central that goes through all of the requirements and the exceptions and all of that. The Secretary of State, you can also type in Nebraska Secretary of State. They have a great pamphlet online as well. That you can look at. The League of Women Voters may have some of their own stuff back there. It sounds like they do. There you go. And I recognize that pamphlet. It's been approved by the Secretary of State and other stakeholders too. So stop by the League of Women Voters table, but otherwise civicnebraska.org, we have the whole list. You can send it to your family members. If you vote by absentee, this was quite the debate in the legislature.
Vote by mail.
If you vote by mail, you have to put down, so if you take out your driver's license card, there's a identification number on there, not your social security, but a driver's license identification number. You have to put that on the envelope. So that's your presentation of ID essentially. You have to put that number on your envelope, sign it, and send it back to the Secretary of State. So you'll still be able to vote by mail, and you'll still get, if you're in Douglas County or Lancaster County, I know they send out those automatic vote by mail request cards. You'll get that, but you need to have an identification card, state identification card, whether it's driver's license or just the regular ID, to be able to do that. And like I said, there's some nuances there, so I really encourage you to go back there and get one of those pamphlets from the League of Women Voters so that you have that for your friends and family.
And I know we're probably all going to be watching a bill that was introduced this session that reduces the amount of time, the window for voting absentee from 35 days to 21 days.
Yeah, so there is a bill, I think it's by Senator Ben Hansen again. He's very interested in voting issues this year. But in any case, yeah, right now we have a 35-day window. Ballots usually start going out to people that are on the permanent vote by mail list 35 days before the election. And, we know that a lot of people, they hold on to those ballots until a week or two before the election. They want to get informed on the issues, or they know who they're voting for and they don't have any doubt of that and they send it in, right? Or they're going to be out of town in a few weeks and they send it in that way. And there's really no reason to reduce that amount of time, in my opinion. But we have one of the best windows in the entire country for vote by mail, and increasingly vast. I don't know if it's a majority yet, but close to a majority of Nebraskans are starting to vote by mail. So
That's interesting.
Yep.
And there are a couple of all vote by mail counties that are in the western part of our state.
Yep. Yeah. Like Cherry
6,
County.
thank you.
Yeah. There's 6. Okay. Yeah. So there are a lot of counties that are all vote by mail. I'll also say, because I've got to do the plug, there's a sign-up sheet there. If you want to get updates on the voting bills that are in the Nebraska legislature this year, you can just write your name on there and your email address and check the voting rights box and put that in there, and you can get updates on action alerts when you need to take action, things like that. So.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the voter toolbox and the League of Women Voters being here. I was a political science major, but not University of Nebraska, so I did not know when I moved back to Nebraska that there are people in this state, because of the way our voting laws are written, that if we want to vote in a primary, but we feel strongly not necessarily about the candidate in the party that we are registered to vote, but another candidate, that we can flip-flop our party affiliation as often as we want, election by election, that there are people who, or you can just register as an independent and request whatever.
It depends on what party.
Okay.
My understanding is that you can register as an independent. I think the Democratic Party has allowed the independents to vote in the Democratic Party ballot,
Okay.
but the Republican Party has not allowed that
Okay.
yet, in my understanding, unless there's something. Okay, I'm seeing the League of Women Voters out there.
So what you can do, though, if you're a registered independent and you want to vote in the Republican primary because you have an opinion on who the next governor may be or member of Congress, you can decide to switch your party affiliation and say, I'm going to be a Republican because I want to vote in this primary. Or you say, I want to be a Democrat so I can vote and make a decision between a couple candidates. So you are allowed to change your party affiliation in Nebraska.
You just have to do it, I think it's the 10 business days before the election, so you have to do it by the voter registration deadline.
So you vote the primary that way.
Yes,
Can you switch it before the general?
yes,
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so you can.
I've done that.
Okay.
And for the people that will be listening or recording, the question was, can you be one party for the primary and one party for the general and switch? The answer is yes.
It doesn't work that way in every state, does it?
I mean, there's some states where there are no partisan primaries. So open primaries is one of the policy changes that Civic Nebraska has been pushing for, to make it so that it's the top two vote getters. And in some cases, that's how our legislative elections are done right now. When I ran in my general election, I ran against another Democrat. It was nonpartisan by our name in both. But, I think it creates more representative elections because you have a broader array of people that are voting in the primary. And in Nebraska, quite frankly, statewide, that would probably mean a lot of times 2 Republicans in the general. But there's going to be some areas where it could be 2 Democrats, like in my legislative district.
Interesting, okay. I'm a little speechless now, I have to gather my thoughts.
There's so much nuance
Your
to
political science
yes,
mind,
definitely.
Yeah, well, that was 45 years ago, so.
Noted.
I don't know. Are there any current measures being taken to change that other than Civic Nebraska's? Is there anything on the slate right now in this session that would change voting?
There isn't. There was a bill, actually it could be carryover legislation. My sessions kind of blur together. There is a bill, I think by Senator Bostar, now that I recall, that is carryover legislation from last year that would make it open primaries for all of the statewide offices. And it's unique. I mean, we set the rules for how our federal delegation is elected essentially. And so I don't know if that bill's gonna go anywhere, but maybe a ballot initiative one day, we'll see.
Interesting. What have I forgotten to ask about that you would like to talk
Well, did you want me to
about?
touch on legislative advocacy down Capitol?
Yeah, that was my next when we.
Okay, will
Yeah.
we transition? Okay.
Yeah, if we feel like we're done, or Omid, do you have something that you wanna add?
We covered the,
Think we
Yeah.
covered everything?
Oh, I just reiterating that ballot initiatives have until July 3rd to turn in all of those signatures. So you're likely to see more activity ramping up between now and then. So we can get those on the ballot, hopefully.
Great, thank you.
Oh, question back
Question.
there. And
I signed lots of petitions and then I worried, did I already sign this petition? What is your system for removing people who accidentally signed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So with paid sick, we are working with a firm that is helping to verify signatures. So, if you happen to sign it twice, there is a tracking system so that we know, oh, this person has signed it twice and they're duplicates, so we can remove it.
And then there's no penalty for that either. So don't worry about, getting charged with a felony or anything like that. I mean, what they do is when the election commissioners and the county clerks get the signatures, they just check the box once they verified your name, the fact that you're registered in that county, and then that your signature generally matches that signature. And then if there's a multiple or a duplicate after that, they just put that to the side. So,
Yeah, I think, yeah.
That's good to know.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, is there any action for ballot initiatives? Is there any requirement, action by the governor or the Nebraska Supreme Court, or any, it just becomes law?
well,
There's a process.
Omaid mentioned this briefly when he was talking about the process a little bit. So the governor has nothing to do with the ballot initiative. There's no veto power, there's nothing like that. Obviously, they can slow roll certain things, like they did with Medicaid expansion and casino gaming, but the Supreme Court, on the other hand, that is where ballot initiatives have been kicked off, like the medical marijuana one, and particularly based on the single subject rule. They also kicked off a casino gaming initiative that got enough signatures as well about 15 or so years ago, I think. And so the Supreme Court is the arbiter of whether or not something conforms to the constitutional requirement that all ballot initiatives have a single subject. So they do have a say. They also have a say on certain other things, like maybe sufficiency of signatures if there's like a very narrow margin, and that would actually change the outcome of whether it would be qualified. And then the Secretary of State, they also have a little bit of say, but everything the Secretary of State does can get appealed to the Supreme Court in terms of sufficiency and single subjects. So it's really the Supreme Court that is the arbiter of whether or not something makes it on the ballot if there's a constitutional issue raised.
And I guess we probably want to, you mentioned single subject a couple times.
Oh yeah,
Maybe we should explain that. So in other states, you can put forth an initiative that has broader language. Nebraska it has to be this very narrowly defined issue that you're trying to go for. So an example would be in Ohio, well, there is a reproductive rights ballot initiative that is collecting signatures called Protect Our Rights. And in Ohio, the language was protecting the right to reproductive freedom. And then it was like including miscarriage or infertility or reproductive access, right? So in Nebraska, we couldn't do something like that because it's too broad and you can't actually give all of those definitions. So we had to narrow it to this is the actual language that we're using up to liability, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, it has to, maybe just to walk through some steps after you turn signatures. So one is when you turn in, the Secretary of State then sends all the petitions to each county for verification. And around that time, like Joe and Adam have said, usually you have a strong opponent that want to sue the campaign, and the most common argument they have is that it violates single subject. And so after the medical marijuana lawsuit, the standard is what's, I think, a natural necessary connection the language has to have to the purpose of it. And so the original purpose of single subject was to ensure that you're not including a ton of different unrelated things. So there's some reasonableness there, but I think the Supreme Court probably narrowed what the interpretation of like the long-standing rule was there. And then if your petition passes in November, there is some protection if the legislature wants to come back the next session to try to change it. And so, for instance, for the last minimum wage increase that was passed in 2022, there was legislation the next session to, so the minimum wage in 2022 gradually increased the minimum wage to $15 by 2026. And then every year after that, the minimum wage would be tied to basically the cost of living increases. And so legislation was introduced to one, just create a sub-minimum youth wage to underpay youth workers, and then it also set a hard cap on how much the wage could increase each year at around 1.5 or 2%. So, but if an initiative passes, I think the legislature has to pass it by a be 2/3 majority.
It's 30.
Yeah, at least 30, so there is
Out of
that.
49.
Out of 49, so there's that a bit more of additional protection for the initiative process that way if it does pass. And so there are some obstacles that are like veto points that can happen, I guess if you want to use political science language, with the initiative after you turn in signatures. And so those are some other things to watch for if you're tracking it after, if it does make the ballot after the July deadline.
Go ahead.
So, I'm Toba with the OPS Foundation, and by day, not by night.
Free time.
So I'm very passionate about two of your organizations simply because I get to work with them regularly. The bill that we've watched so closely was 753, which we worked for weeks. I volunteered.
Yeah, referendum, that's actually one we haven't talked about yet. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here we are, we got it on the ballot, and then the sponsoring senator has now filed a lawsuit, I believe, saying that it should be removed from the ballot because it came out of the Appropriations Committee. So I'm just wondering what your legal perhaps opinions are, because we did make it to the ballot. We got more than enough signatures for it, and now it's in jeopardy of potentially being removed. And if you set that precedent of being able to remove it from the ballot, then what?
Maybe we should mention the referendum process, and then I don't know if you all legal folks want to answer. So 753 was the Opportunity Scholarships Bill related to school choice in Nebraska. So that was filed as a bill from Senator Linehan, and it passed. It was something she'd been working on for 7 years in the legislature, and so it finally passed. And so you can also do a referendum. So something goes into effect, you're like, nope, we don't like it, let's pull it back and make it not a law. So that's another way of direct democracy. So many school teachers and other public school supporters did such a lion's share of work over the summer getting enough signatures to put it on the ballot to give voters the option to repeal that law. So now what we're talking about is all the signatures were collected, they were turned in, it was verified, it's ready to go for the ballot, and then now we're in this legal situation. So I'll let the lawyers take over.
And with the referendum, you have a much tighter window of time to get the signatures, so you usually only have 90 days after the law goes into effect, whereas with a ballot initiative, I think the most time you could have is like a year and a half if you start really early. And so it is pretty hectic, and you need to go start out at a sprint to get to what you need. I evidently have not read the complaints. I think my understanding is that there was I don't know what the technical term would be, but there was a filing with the Secretary of State's office to say this actually should not be placed on the ballot. The Secretary of State did say, I think it qualified to be on the ballot last fall. And so I know the pro and anti side have both now submitted arguments to the Secretary of State's office arguing their case as to why it should not be kept on the ballot. I don't know what the timing is for that. And with referendums, I don't think I've seen that with the last referendum we had was probably the one around the death penalty.
Yep.
And there wasn't that sort of back and forth with it that I had remembered, because I think that happened during the election year.
Yep.
I think it was the death penalty passed, and then it was the election came up soon, so.
I think what they're trying to say with this bill is that because it dealt with funding and providing a tax credit for individuals who contribute to a private school for a scholarship for a low-income individual, that the funding and the tax credit that goes to the individual is through the appropriations process. So basically the committee that determines how we spend money, how we spend the tax dollars, and that it wasn't a true legislative decision. So trying to separate and say, well, the ballot initiative process cannot apply to something that's in appropriations, can only apply to something in the legislature. So that's the argument I think that they're trying to make.
It's not a very strong argument, and particularly when Senator Linehan has stated that this is not an appropriation, this is actually a tax credit. I mean, so it's a little bit of doublespeak, but that's my opinion Yeah. And I have not, and just for full disclosure, I have not briefed this issue, I have not delved into the research, but it's just, it doesn't seem like a very strong argument on its face.
But I think you can expect, many times if there's a controversial ballot initiative process, whether it's a referendum or one of the ones that we are a part of, that once something is qualified, that there could be, if there's a strong opposition, that there are lawsuits from a variety of perspectives to either slow down the process or get it kicked off so people don't have an opportunity to vote on it.
And I can guarantee the Secretary of State, whatever they decide on this, they're not gonna have the last word. Both sides will appeal it to the Supreme Court, probably District Court first and then Supreme Court.
So to throw another cliche, democracy is messy.
It is.
It's expensive, it's messy, it's all politics is local. Have I missed any yet?
The sausage being made.
Now we kind of know how the sausage is made, everybody in this room. Are there any other questions about ballot initiatives and petitions before we ask?
I have a question. Sometimes an initiative people will say, did you sign a petition? And I'll say, I didn't know where to go. How do you know is there a list that comes out for different locations? How do you know?
It's really tough, and some people get frustrated with the medical marijuana campaign and probably all the campaigns, I never saw your people. And it's kind of there's not a central clearinghouse, there's not a DMV that you show up and you can just sign all the petitions. So the best way to do it is to get in touch with the campaign. Oftentimes they will put out maps and events and where they'll be generally, because we want people to come. But it's a little bit of hit and miss, and I think you just got to reach out to the campaign.
Okay.
That's the best way to do it. And it's tough because you got to get 38 out of 90 or so counties. And the problem is that we're just not going to be in every county. And so some folks in some counties get really upset. You didn't come to my county, and it's just kind of we don't have $10 million. So,
I will say if you're in the Omaha area, so for basically for Nebraskans, if you go to our website, you can reach out to folks, and then our campaign is powered by a number of organizations across the state, and a lot of those organizations have petitions at their office, and so there's a way for you to connect and then to go to an organization's office and to
it's a good point.
go there too in case that's easier too. And so otherwise, it's just a matter of if you're out at a summer warm weather event, you could hopefully be there. Yeah.
Go to the farmer's market about 3 weeks before the petitions are due on July 3rd, and you'll have plenty of opportunities.
Walgreens on 132nd Center. Or you can also do what I did to gather the petitioners tonight. Go to the Nebraska Secretary of State website. It lists all the petitions that are in circulation. And when you open up any of those petitions and those filings, it gives you the names and the phone numbers and the emails of the sponsors of those petitions. And I sent emails and made phone calls and said, hey, do you guys want to bring your petition to our event and have an opportunity to talk to the people who are going to be attending? So that was kind of efficient. It worked. Okay. Any other questions before I
just have one, and it may be off topic because it has nothing to do with referendums, it has nothing to do with petitions, but it has to do with direct democracy. So I've read the Nebraska Open Meetings Act backwards, forwards, and I've got a master's degree in public administration, but I am not a lawyer. Right? And what protections, I would think the intent of that law would be to give citizens the right to participate in that governmental process, but it seems the antithesis applies, that all the power is with the governing body and not with, at least that's my experience in the city of Bellevue. So what say you?
Yeah, I know enough to be dangerous about what the public meetings law says because I served in the legislature and we kind of played by different rules. We did have hearing notices and things like that were required 2 weeks before bills heard. But unfortunately, I don't know the intricacies of the Public Meetings Act all that well because I haven't served on a body that's been governed by it.
Okay. So I guess the final question of the evening, And we'll start with you, former Senator. We're ramping up for our Jewish Day of Action on February 29th. Can you give us some hot tips about, how to be successful, how to make friends? What makes lobbyists, citizen lobbyists in particular, because I know the professionals kind of have this down. And we do a training session before to talk specifically about issues that we're going to be speaking about or that we're watching. But in your experience, in your, 8 years in the legislature, what worked and what didn't work? What was a big turnoff and what was a real good, solid way to approach somebody?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways, and everybody has a different approach too. So I'd be interested in Joe and Omeid's thoughts on this. I mean, the biggest thing is, the big turnoffs is yelling. Nobody yelling at me has ever really convinced me of anything. And so, obviously don't do that. I'm not worried about that with this group. But I mean, I think the big thing is also know your audience. So if you're going into talking to a senator, whether it's in the lobby or in their office, look at their bio, learn a little bit about them and know what their perspective is. If they approach things from a business perspective, before I was in the legislature, I was advocating on behalf of my organization, Civic Nebraska. So when I was talking about making voting more accessible, I would present the business case to somebody who is really business focused, right? Or more conservative. If I was going into somebody's office and I knew that they were a civil rights attorney, I'd approach it from a civil rights perspective, right? So first, know your audience. Two, I always encourage people, ask senators what their position is on the issue that you're talking about, and then stop talking. Say, can I count on you to support this amendment, this bill, or oppose this bill, or oppose this amendment? Because what I found is a lot of people, they would just keep talking. And there were some times where I didn't want to tell them my position because either one, I didn't know, or two, I thought, I don't know if they'll like it. And what I found is people just keep talking. And I'm like, okay, well, there's a vote now. I got to go back in. They're like, oh, thanks for your time. And they had no clue on where I was on the issue. Sometimes that wasn't because I was trying to sneak out of it. It was just that there was no space for me to tell them my thoughts on the issue or ask them questions, right? So just make sure that you have that pause at the end and know that when you're calling senators off the floor, they are going to be very busy. They've got a million things in their head, whether you like it or not. They've got to get back in there usually for a vote or to keep vote counting for one of their bills or something like that. So really practice, your kind of succinct, 1 or 2 minute elevator pitch of, we are here to ask you to oppose or support this bill for X, Y, and Z reasons, and it's personally important to me because it's going to impact me or somebody I know in this way. How can I count on you to either oppose or support this bill? And they'll either say, I need some more information, I haven't made a decision on it, or here's my position on it, and here's why. And then follow up with them with more information, and then ask them at the end of that follow-up email, and how do you think you will vote on this issue? I mean, so I think making sure that you give space for the legislator to let them know their position, or if they have questions is really important. And I think sometimes people get nervous a little bit and they just kind of talk it out. And then there's no space for that. So that's really important. And I think, quite frankly, also telling why it's personally important to you, like somebody it'll impact or how to impact you personally is really important too. Statistics and facts, all great things. But there's nothing more powerful than a personal story. I've changed the way I was going to vote on certain issues based on unintended consequences that I would have never thought of, that my constituents came to me and said, you realize this is going to do this to my family or my business or something like that. So.
Interesting. Anything to add from seasoned lobbyists?
Yeah, I would just say that we are the second house, and so we have a duty in our unicameral to be engaged in what's happening, to have opinions, and to bring those opinions to lawmakers. So I would just encourage you to take that seriously as we engage in democracy. The other suggestion I would have is if you have not yet developed a relationship with your personal senator, that's a great opportunity to start with. It can seem daunting to pull a bunch of senators off the floor, but if you start with this person actually represents me, or this person represents the area where I work or I volunteer, so I have some knowledge about this issue because of my lived experience, so I'm talking to you because you represent an area of interest. So, I mean, those can be some ways of approaching senators.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I know at Appleseed we usually, I think one of the things that I was always struck me when we bring, like Adam said, I think the importance of practicing what you want to say, because the Capitol can, at first maybe be an intimidating place, but once you actually have your senator come off the floor to talk to you, it's like, okay.
Let's go time.
Yeah, I think keeping it succinct, but I do think, like in my experience, senators, and albeit like a very, very, very narrow exceptions, are gonna, especially if you're telling your own story, are gonna take you seriously and treat you respectfully because you are sharing part of yourself or somebody you know to them, which Adam, like Adam said, can make a policy that is just sort of theoretical become more practical and grounded in reality for that person. And so I think just having the practice, talking it with a family member or a friend or whoever else, just to kind of get it down so you have the pitch and ask ready to go. And I think too, the follow-up is also really important. If you're catching somebody at a bad time or if they're just busy, the follow-up, and if you have that direct relationship or that effort to do so, that can just help build momentum for that policy, but also for future things you want to engage with your senator on.
And I'll add, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna add that I think sometimes we feel intimidated by senators because of the title that they hold and the power that they can wield. And just kind of remember that they're part-time folks, and no disrespect, they're just regular people.
They have good days and bad days, and everything in between.
Yeah, and they don't know everything about all the issues, even all the bills that are being introduced, because there's hundreds of them every session. So give them a little grace in knowing that they may not have gotten to the issue that you want to discuss, and also you can have an opportunity to educate them because they don't know everything about all of the different issues.
The last thing I'll say on this, because I know we're running out of time here, is just keep in mind that, state senators, they only represent 40,000 people. Your city councilor in Omaha represents more people than a state senator. So it is very much like a personal, it's a small constituency. And I will tell you that when I got feedback from constituents, particularly more than like 3 or 4 on a single issue, with the exception of like the top 3 issues of that year, you get a lot of feedback on those. I was surprised, and I responded, and I took it to heart. I took it seriously. I think a lot of people think that when you're contacting your state senator, it's kind of like contacting your U.S. senator, where you're just kind of screaming into the void, and that's not always the case either. It's important to contact your U.S. senator, but when it's your state senator, you don't realize you don't get a ton of constituent feedback on a lot of issues. So it actually does matter. And if you can get 4 or 5 of your friends and family to contact state senator and they're all constituents of that person, they're going to take it up.
Yeah, and I'm going to add to that. What we discovered last year was that there are very few senators of the 49 who have Jewish constituents. Many of them have never met a Jewish person before. So we had people like Senator Tom Brandt, he wanted to know more. He was really interested in the spectrum of belief across all the Jewish streams of ritual practice and belief. And they were very receptive to our folks who went down there and really welcomed the opportunity to talk to us. So I think that was part of what was so exhilarating too on some levels. Ellie?
I was just wondering if you have any suggestions when you're approaching a senator whose views, are very, very different from your own. Like diametrically opposed, and you know that because of, what they've expressed in the legislature, whatever. And is there any particular way of approaching that person that would be effective?
Yeah, first I would just acknowledge, if I'll give you an example. I'm very pro-choice, but every year my Catholic church in my district, or a few of them, would come and they'd send people to come and talk to me about the pro-life issue and their perspectives on that. I always appreciated the way that they approached it, because they said, listen, we know that you're opposed to our position on this issue, but we want to talk to you a little bit about that and provide some background and some stories. And we had a really good conversation. It didn't change me on that issue, but it was a way where we could really have a strong dialogue. And, I could talk to them, because I grew up Catholic. My wife's Jewish, but I grew up in a Catholic family, and so I also knew their perspective. I think that's the best way to do it, is just to immediately throw out there, like, hey, listen, I know that you don't agree with me on this issue, but I just want to give you another perspective, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come out and have that conversation with me. That's really important. That's the way I would start it. And who knows, on the hot button issues, like, I won't even list them, we all know what they are. Maybe you won't switch them on it, but you'd be surprised. 95% of the issues going through the legislature, I did not have a position on it before I went in, because I just didn't have a position on dry beans, like in the regulations. I didn't know, but I heard back from all the dry beans folks, and I knew that issue really well, and I listened, so yeah, that's the way I approach it.
One of the benefits of that approach too is if you develop that relationship that's respectful, you can again build a bridge to other issues that you could find a connection on. So like all the organizations represented up here have worked with senators who are diametrically opposed to like 90% of maybe what the mission is, but there is that 10%, and the reason why we can all make progress with the legislature on the 10% of those issues is because we've developed a respectful relationship where we're transparent and honest about differences, but also want to try to find common ground on issues that we can work on together. And I think that approach is one way to do that. So even if you don't find common ground on that issue for future issues, you can, there's that possibility based on how you want to approach your work at the legislature.
One last thing on that, because that's a really good pointer. Also look at what bills they introduce that session. I bet there's a bill that you support or you think is a good idea. Start out with that in the conversation. Just say, I'm here to talk to you about this issue. I know we disagree on that. I do want to quickly thank you, though, for LB whatever. I'm a big supporter of that, and I really appreciate you introducing that. So it's like, oh, okay. It kind of disarms people. People feel a little bit more comfortable, and then you can have the conversation.
Well, and just, thinking about, we had one advocate that was talking to a senator about a completely different issue. And in that conversation, something else came up, and they started talking about childcare. And so this person was like, well, wait a minute, it costs money for childcare. And they were like, yes, it does. But this person's lived experience was an older gentleman. His wife stayed home, she didn't work, she took care of the kids. So he had no real knowledge about that until he heard this from the advocate and then called his daughter, who happens to be an attorney, and he's like, wait a minute, so my 3 grandkids are in child care? She's like, yes, Dad, and it costs X. And so all of a sudden, just this little tangent of a conversation changed his mind in terms of supporting affordable child care in our state.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's called human connection, right?
Mm-hmm. Human connection.
Yes.
Sharon, you brought up a Jewish Day of Advocacy that's coming up. Can you speak to that a little bit, and what are you advocating?
Yeah, so we go down, we host a legislative breakfast in the morning, and we invite all the senators and their senior staff. And we go down with our approved slate of issues. This year, there aren't really a lot. We have a bill in particular that Senator Tom Brewer sponsored for us and brought forth. It's LB 887, and it provides the establishment of a nonprofit security grant program here in Nebraska. And we did that after researching the number of nonprofit agencies in the state from 2018 through like 2021 or 22 who had applied for and been denied federal nonprofit security grant dollars. And this is to harden security. So synagogues, mosques, organizations that may have ideologies that make them a target for domestic terrorists or vandalism or worse. 47 of the ones that applied and over $5.5 million was denied. There are also nonprofits, particularly in the state of Nebraska, where we're not necessarily a national hub for anything, that just don't have the bandwidth or the experience to apply for a federal grant. And we want to make sure that we set aside some funding in this state to provide the opportunities for them to get the kind of security need and assistance. So that's the big one that we'll be talking about. If it comes up, we will still bring up the Holocaust and Genocide Education Funding Bill, but for strategic reasons and because of what went down in the legislature last session, I don't think Senator Day, who sponsored it, wants to prioritize it. So we may let that one slide, let things calm down, and then bring it up again in the 109th session that starts next year. What are some of the other ones that were on our, I can't even recall. We're monitoring many of them. There was a bill that was introduced by Senator Lippincott that we're very concerned about. It has to do with in counties and communities where there is a shortage or lack of school counselors, that clergy can take that position. And we have some questions about that, and we want to talk to him about that and what the intent is. Now, I also want to add, this is probably what I should have led with, we don't take the lead on anything that isn't about Israel or anti-Semitism, but we are allies with other organizations like the Women's Fund, like the Nebraska Civic Engagement Table, Civic Nebraska, Appleseed, anyone, and on a nonpartisan basis, if there's an issue that meets the criteria of Jewish values, if it's on the agenda of the JFNA and any other major Jewish organization, then we will consider looking for allies and lend our support to those issues. So that's kind of what we do. We go, as Zoe said, we literally pull people off the floor.
So you guys have a breakfast and then you go
We
up to the
have a
floor?
breakfast and then we go up to the Capitol, and Senator Arch we'll sit in the gallery for a while and he'll say, hey, welcome Jewish Community Relations Council and Jewish Federation of Omaha for your day of action. And we'll pull senators off the floor, the ones that we've identified that we want to speak with. So I don't think that 887 is terribly controversial, and I don't think that we're gonna run into any issues on that.
And that's February 29th?
February 29th, yeah. It's fun. If you talk to Ellie was there, Zoe was there, Mike Siegel went, Lisa Lewis. We had a nice little crew down there. But we're hoping that all of you will be able to join us and bring your friends. Too many is like herding cats, but we can cover more senators if we've.
Yeah, there's 49 senators, so
Yeah.
you get 49 people.
Yeah. And as I said, many of them have never met a Jewish person before. They were thrilled, and we did hear from some of them about, again, there were plenty of issues in last session that they wanted to know the spectrum of thought within the Jewish community on certain issues. And that's what we're there to share with them. And if they have any further questions, we want to be resources to them. So it was fun. Hope you'll join us, all of you. Any other questions? Yes, Gary.
Is there going to be a relaunch of an effort to get an anti-BDS bill passed?
The governor pretty much nipped that one in the bud with the resolution that he signed after October 7th. And he basically forbade anybody, this resolution used language that made it impossible for people to discriminate in their business practices against Israel. That's a good example of a bill that there was no unanimity in the Jewish community about that. And we would have preferred that they had at least spoken with us before that bill was introduced. It came from an outside party, out of state. It was not, we got kind of blindsided by that bill. And the reason we felt compelled to testify on that was because it brings out the BDS supporters in force. And when they present misinformation about boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and particularly about Israel, that we needed to be down there, as you were, to combat that. So it was not I don't think it was a very popular thing in the Senate either. I don't know, it failed in committee the first time it was introduced. So I don't know if it would have gotten out of committee, and that could be why, in addition to what happened on October 7th, which the legislature and the governor have been extremely supportive of our community and Israel. We don't have to deal with that. Hopefully never again. Any other questions? Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I just have a comment. So if anybody would like to consider changing their party before the primary, the ladies from the League of Women Voters can do that for you right now tonight.
Thank you. Also, if you'd like to be on the list of getting early voting ballots sent to you, you can do that.
And also, we are honored to be sponsors of the League's Voting 411 Guide, which, for many of us has been a Bible in every election, because we wouldn't know about some of these issues and some of these candidates and where they stand. So we're very proud to work with the League of Women Voters to help with that guide.
Well, and then I've got to go back to Lincoln here. But while we're talking about the League of Women Voters, Civic Nebraska also partners with the League and a bunch of other organizations to run a nonpartisan election protection program. And it's Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and everything in between. Folks, we give you basically an hour, 2-hour training on election law, kind of 101, and then we assign you to a polling location that's near your home, and you get all the credentials and everything that are approved by the election commissioner's office. So you get the opportunity to learn about how elections work, and then you also get to be able to also be a nonpartisan election observer. So if you're interested in that opportunity, you can also fill out that sheet and just note that on there. So anyway, thank you.
And I would just add that several of us that are collecting signatures for ballot initiatives, Epic's here, and I have, Omaid and I have Paid Sick, and I also have Protect Our Rights, which is the abortion rights initiative. So if you are interested in signing any of those, come talk to us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much for being here.